Ladies and gentlemen, pay attention. This is your boy, the coach from the WWE. I would like to welcome you to the very first wrestling podcast in the world to take you on a weekly deep dive into classic matches along with legends of the squared circle. Enjoy the discussion. Enjoy the back and forth. There's so much to get into. Ladies and gentlemen, this is The Payoff.
Dude, that was bad, but you get the idea. That was my attempt at the Marc Mero and Sable theme song. This is Tom Healy, and as always, I am joined by my co-host, Jeffrey Ryan. Jeff, how excited is 12-year-old Jeff to be covering this episode?
Yeah, the adolescent in me is still waiting on that moment when we get the Sable return and we get the much better roar and whip crack. But either way, exciting stuff happening today. So this
Dude, what would the pop have been like at the Royal Rumble if she came out at 30 in the Women's Rumble?
You and I talked about, Trish got a good one anyways, and that was a nice little story. You and I talk about it a lot. Like, it's got to happen. The day will come. We will get it one day. So,
is she the last woman that's alive that would be like a surprise return women's wrestler?
She'd definitely be the biggest surprise.
I mean, I guess if Sunny came out, I mean, she came back for the Hall of Fame at least, but I guess if she came out, but there's not many left. I mean, hell, we've gotten like multiple Trish and Lita matches and a lot of them come back, which has been awesome, but she's like, the main one that, I mean, she's just been gone forever.
You don't see Jacqueline much, but there's a few. But she's definitely, Sable is definitely the top. With how much Brock's there, she's hanging around. So, whatever. It's all good stuff. But as always, welcome to The Payoff. Subscribe to The Payoff wherever you might be listening. Spotify, Apple, Stitcher, you name it. Just make sure to subscribe to us. Give us those 5 stars on Apple Podcasts. So we always push it because it helps us a lot. And, of course, spread the word about the show. We love seeing the interaction on Twitter. We've gotten some good response to these last few shows. So it's always good to see people reaching out to us, talking to us. So, and, of course, you can find us Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, at Payoff Pod. Tom and I are on there, too, at Payoff Tom, at Payoff Jeff. So, Tom, what else you got?
Well, we're back with a guest this week because it's, we're sticking with the WrestleMania theme throughout WrestleMania.
We are on the road.
We are on the road. So this is a good one. This is a WrestleMania debut. Marc Mero is going to be an awesome guest, but then we've also got some really, really awesome WrestleMania matches and moments coming up. With no guests. So we're excited to, again, be mixing in some guests, doing some episodes by ourselves. We hope you're digging all kinds of different types of episodes that we're doing. We're going to keep that up. We got some new guests that are coming up this spring. So keeping it fresh on The Payoff, trying to make this show as strong as possible, mix it up. We hope you're enjoying it. We appreciate the interaction on social media. Keep it coming. Tell your friends about the show. And thank you to all our listeners around the world. Jeff, quickly, how do we do things here at The Payoff for some of our new friends?
Of course, I'm sure everyone can recite it, but we're going to say it anyways. But, of course, here at The Payoff, we give you that deep dive into a match every Monday. And, of course, every episode, it's got how many parts? 3 parts. We got the build, the payoff, the aftermath. We talk about that before, we talk about that during, and of course that after and what happened. So we got those reviews, we got those write-ups, we give our score and our thoughts. So Tom, let's just jump right in. Why did you want to talk about this match?
Dude, as you said those 3 things, I started thinking about the Drew McIntyre. Is it 3-2-1 or 1-2-3 before he does the Claymore kick?
I
think it's 3-2-1.
I'm fooling myself. Yes, you're right.
Okay, look, and everyone knows I'm a huge Shawn Michaels mark, but later in his career when he started doing the tap, 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 I almost hurt my knee trying to do that on a hard floor. But when he would do that, I'm just hit the damn guy. You're trying to win, right? And so I don't imagine him and Brock Lesnar, right? These 2 big ass guys. Great fight, right? I want to see him hit the kick. I don't want to see him do the countdown thing. It's just if you want to present wrestling like it's a shoot, like it's real, like it's a fight, I don't know. In boxing, I don't see many like 1, 2, 3, and then they hit them with the knockout punch. I don't see much of it in UFC either. So I don't like that. That's just my gripe, but I'm not a fan of this like counting before moves or, even the woo-ah that Roman Reigns does. Not a fan, man. Not a fan. And I feel like more and more of these guys now are doing it. You didn't see a ton of it back then. I liked when there was a setup move, a finishing move. I want the big boot, then the leg drop. I don't need like a countdown to it. I also like the RKO out of nowhere, the super kick out of nowhere. I don't need like some big setup.
I still think the best super kick from Shawn Michaels is the
Shelton Benjamin.
Yeah, it's always like that will forever be where he killed Shelton Benjamin. So that was good.
Yeah, I like him out of nowhere. So I'm excited about this show for a couple reasons, right? I always thought Marc Mero was underrated. We'll talk more about this, but the Wildman gimmick sucked. The Johnny B. Bad gimmick, we remember it, but it kind of sucked. You weren't putting the world title on the guy. The Marvelous Marc Mero kind of sucked. So I never felt like Marc Mero, the man, ever got a fair shake in terms of like a really good gimmick, character, persona, and it really hurt him. So I find his career fascinating, and it's a big kind of what if. He had a good run, made some money in the business, was part of some cool angles and stuff. But man, this guy to me should have been a lot bigger of a star. Obviously, the guy could cut a promo based on, the professional speaking work he's done. So that could have been there. The work ethic, the work rate, the look, the body, that was all there. The guy should have been a star. So that's interesting to me. Then, of course, Sable, who wasn't even supposed to be a wrestler or a character or anything else, who was kind of a throwaway valet in the process of bringing the Wildman into WWF, becomes this massive star. Jeff, there was a stretch where Sable was arguably the biggest star in the company, maybe second behind Steve Austin. And then, of course, the Brock Lesnar connection. So there's a lot there that's really fun to talk about as he becomes a WWF superstar. That's why I wanted to cover this. Jeff, what about you?
Yeah, I think it's because this is really the first real true 2-night build, I guess. Is it kind of, it's a very quick build, but it's over 24 hours. But at the same time, I think different than any other of the matches that you and I have talked about, the whole story, the two like between him and her and then Triple H or Hunter Hearst Helmsley, wasn't Triple H then, but they never were in the ring together. It wasn't a match that got this story and debut set up. It was all outside of the ring or when other things were happening, like we're going to talk about. And so just totally different in regards to how we got this build or this build, which gave us the payoff, is just totally different than any of the ones that we've talked about.
Yeah, and the other thing, too, is remember, this is the beginning of the night after WrestleMania Raw meaning something. And we'll get into, a couple of the debuts that took place on the show. But this was kind of the beginning of that, really. So that's a fun angle as well in this whole show.
Yeah, absolutely. So you and I are both, we're ready. We got a lot. Everyone should be excited. We got a lot to talk about. We got some good stuff here. So Tom, with that, let's get to the build.
Oh, it's time for the build.
So we're going to cover two shows today. So this is all about Marc Mero's debut. The debut on screen takes place at WrestleMania 12, and then he wrestles his first match the night after on Raw. So we're going to watch both of those with Marc Mero, and we're going to discuss, again, to Jeff's point, this 2-night debut, if you will. We're not going to get an exhaustive recap of WrestleMania 12. We'll save that for another match and another night. There's definitely some stuff on that show worth covering in detail. But just to refresh everyone's memory, 1996 is when WrestleMania took place. WrestleMania 12 took place. It's March 31st. It's in the Arrowhead Pond in Anaheim, California. So it's just a basic arena show. And the show was memorable for a lot of reasons. Again, we won't get into it, but we're here to talk about the Marc Mero debut, which, crazy as it is, takes place right after the Ultimate Warrior squashing in about a minute Hunter Hearst Helmsley, who was
minute 40. I got it. Don't worry, buddy.
Yeah, who's over as like a major star. I'm not major star, but an IC level star. This Hunter Hearst Helmsley, hits the Pedigree, who I don't believe anybody had kicked out of. I mean, remember, this is an era where no one was kicking out of finishers, but Triple H gives the Pedigree to the Ultimate Warrior, no sells it, boom, he's up, he hits his finisher, he wins. Crazy. So then after that's when we get this Marc Mero interview. But I gotta ask you, two things. First of all, do you know who got the biggest pop at WrestleMania 12?
The Warrior.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
The Ultimate Warrior was the most over guy. So when people trash the Warrior and stuff and, I can't believe he came back. I mean, obviously the guy was, a little crazy behind the scenes, tough to work with, but the dude was over. And if in this era, and this is a whole nother show, whole nother time to talk about, but in this era, if the Warrior had maybe played a little bit nicer with management and gotten along a little better with Vince, he might have had a world title run in him because he was just so damn popular at this time. So it's just crazy to think about what could have been. And remember, we're, the year after the WrestleMania 13, because of Shawn leaving, there was a lot in flux. I could have definitely seen Vince hitting the panic button and giving the world title back to the Ultimate Warrior, but he just wasn't around by then. So he comes back. That's really big, kind of the re-debut of the Ultimate Warrior. Triple H is accompanied by Sable, which, Jeff, I'm sure you're going to get into, and then we get that. So that's where this interview takes place, is at WrestleMania 12. And, dude, I mean, look at the crowd. I'm sorry, look at the talent on this show that this crowd got to see, okay? I mean, you had Shawn Michaels and Bret Hart, Undertaker and Diesel, Ultimate Warrior and Triple H, Steve Austin, Roddy Piper, Goldust, Bulldog, Owen Hart, Vader, Yokozuna, Jake Roberts, Sonny, Sable. I mean, for a show that's certainly not one of the best or most remembered WrestleManias, there was a lot of talent on this show. Granted, some hadn't really found their stride. So I thought that was interesting. Then we're also going to talk about the next night on Raw, which is when he makes his wrestling debut. And again, dude, crazy show. This was a really good Raw. You had Mankind's debut, Marc Mero's wrestling debut. You had Shawn Michaels as the new world champion in the big interview to kind of kick him off as world champion. Just keep in mind, this is in a 3,000 seat venue, okay? Because this wasn't when they were, doing the big Raw in the same city as WrestleMania. But here's who you would have saw live and in person in this 3,000 seat arena if you were at this show. You would have saw the Ultimate, and some of this was dark matches, but you would have saw the Ultimate Warrior, Goldust, Jake Roberts, Owen Hart, British Bulldog, Undertaker, Vader, Mankind, Marc Mero, Sable, the future Kane, Sonny, the future JBL, Vince McMahon, and Shawn Michaels. Pretty crazy, dude. That would have been a fun show to go to. So those are the two shows we're talking about. Jeff, give us the storyline build of how we get Marc Mero in the WWF.
Yeah, all kinds of good stuff here. So we're going to set the stage here.
Absolutely.
We have Hunter Hearst Helmsley, who I will refer to as Triple H, but this was Hunter Hearst Helmsley. And so you also had Sable and Marc Mero. So Sable actually made her debut. It was that WrestleMania 12. She was escorting Hunter, and I'm just going to say it, Hunter Hearst Helmsley, because there is a big difference. So she was escorting Hunter Hearst Helmsley to the ring so he could take on the returning Ultimate Warrior. At the time, and a lot of people forget, like, Hunter Hearst Helmsley was before he was Triple H. It was before he was the Game, before the Cerebral Assassin, like all these different things but Hunter Hearst Helmsley would actually come to the ring every week with a new woman as his valet. His theme was actually like, it's comical at this point, but it was like a real light, like piano, like you might see in some like the Queen or something like that, like just real light and playing that. But he kind of was, the way that it was described in a lot of places I was reading was the Connecticut blue blood. He was just an upper class snobby heel. That's what it was. And so just really a real dick. There's no other way to put it. That's all he was. So Warrior, though, had been quasi-retired for a few years. He actually left the WWF in 1992. This was 1996, so he had been gone for a while. Like we already said, Warrior, he squashed Hunter Hearst Helmsley in what was officially, I saw somewhere between a minute 38, a minute 40. So very quick match. The match itself, though, not great in my opinion. And I'll talk more about it, but the individual entrances were both longer than the match itself. It was pretty much like a clothesline, a no-sell pedigree, and like a splash for a win. Like it was not like it was like, when Goldberg came back and squashed Brock. Like it was stunning, really, at the time. So
It might be like Goldberg when he squashes Bray in Saudi Arabia in a few weeks.
I don't think, no, they're not going to do that to us. I hope not. That'd be crazy. But,
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see.
oh boy. Yeah, yeah. So I'm just going to keep moving on here because that's just nonsense. So maybe he's Sister Abigail, but we've kind of talked about Marc Mero's kind of career, like a little bit on our previous episode with him. And we were talking about The Rock's debut. And so this is one, though, that up to this point, he had been wrestling with WCW. Now, I say W to kind of, I always like trying to lay the timeline out for people here. This was not Nitro WCW. This was not Monday Night Wars WW. This was before all of that. And he actually started in 1991, and he was only an enhancement talent. Like Tom said, he was actually signed by Dusty Rhodes as Johnny B. Bad. Tom, do you remember who Johnny B. Bad's first manager was?
I have no clue.
Teddy Long.
Ooh,
so
okay.
Teddy Long, we it's been a while since we've done some trivia, and so we've got the first manager for Johnny B. Bad was Teddy Long.
Have I ever told you my Teddy Long story?
Probably, but let's share it, please.
So I'm at a SmackDown taping at the Civic Arena in Pittsburgh. I don't know if you've ever been to a show where you've had the really shitty obstructed view seats that are kind of by the entrance. Okay, so you can't really see the Titantron.
You're behind it. Yeah,
you're behind it, but they're kind of close. And when you're, I don't know, high school or college or whatever I was. Look, it was a $30 ticket, right?
You don't care. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It was fine. So, and this was actually a show where WWF champion Hulk Hogan defeated Chris Jericho.
Oh, man.
Okay. Guess who I watched that match with? I watched it with Teddy Long, who kind of walked out from the back. And I think he was a ref at the time, but he just sat there and we were just bullshitting with him, me and my buddy, for like half the show. It was so random. So
you would definitely not see that nowadays. Yeah.
No. Of course not. But very, very nice guy. So that's just random.
It's
but
a good Teddy
I didn't know if
Long
I'd ever
story.
told you that. Oh, yeah.
So he was eventually signed, or like I say, we signed by Dusty Rhodes, but then he made his pay-per-view debut. It was the Great American Bash 1990. For those of you that don't remember who Yellow Dog is, that would be the one and only Brian Pillman, who we've talked about quite a bit on this show. Had Brian Pillman Jr. on the show as well, too. Hope to have him back. And so that was good stuff. So the match, though, between Warrior and Hunter, it's not as important as to the story, but rather what happened immediately after it. So I'm going to consider this the build to Mero Sable teaming. It's just how I'm cutting it. But so here we go. So is literally right after the match, if you're kind of watching this on the network or kind of checking out, as soon as it, like the match was over, it cut back to a backstage interview with a debuting Marc Mero. Or I don't know if you like when you watched it or not, but one thing I noticed is they called him but it was Mero debuting and doing this interview. So he was, WCW still owned the Johnny B. Bad name, and so he had to be, which was the Wildman Marc Mero. So I will say, I think it was like it was really like the week after he left WCW and he had some issues with the storyline that was happening there, that it was literally like the week after. And especially like nowadays in 2020 and hearing about like, the dirt sheet, like rumors about contracts and like non-compete clauses and like time getting added to contracts and stuff. It's just crazy to think like literally 1 week and, he's got, like he's on WCW and then the next week he's not and he's on WWE. And so happened more often back then. We know some of the more famous ones with people jumping, but just crazy with that. So he was doing this backstage interview and then it was actually Hunter Hearst Helmsley, who after he had left the ring was coming through backstage. He bumped into Mero and they kind of pushed each other, but it's just real quick. And then he pointed to Sable and said, "This whole thing is your fault." So he was blaming his loss on Sable. And then, of course, as we do in the wrestling universe, the two of them started brawling and that was it. So that was when you kind of had that story being set up that, the three of them, that was their first kind of on screen, the three of them, their interaction. It was the following night then after Mania that Marc Mero made his in-ring debut. It was a Monday Night Raw against, again, one of our favorites, reinventing himself, Isaac Yankem. And so the two of them in the ring, that's kind of where I'll kind of hit the brakes for now. We got some more to talk about. So that's the second match to this and kind of what happened. So I'll leave everyone on the edge of their seat. And Tom, I'll kind of kick it to you before we get into the payoff. So what else do you have?
Wow, you covered a lot. I'll just add a little color to it. So, dude, just a weird era, right? It's like some of the stuff, I mean, you have like Sean and Brett, these great in-ring workers going 60 minutes in an Iron Man match. And you also have an evil dentist. Just weird. And remember, this is before fake Razor and fake Diesel. So there's like some really good, serious shit going on in these shows. I mean, you have Triple H and Steve Austin kind of finding their own way, Sean and Brett on the top of the card. And then you got some of this goofy shit. The Triple H gimmick, I thought it was pretty good. I still love that music. I'd love to see him one more time just come out to that thing. I don't know why he would ever do it, but I don't know. I just think that'd be funny, but I still love that music and he was a good heel. So I thought it was a good angle and way to introduce Mero and Sable, and it all fit really well. I'll talk more about this after in the aftermath, but man, that Wildman gimmick just sucked. And the last thing is I just chuckle, and I don't know if you've ever heard the story. I know Mero tells it and some other, a variety of places, but it's, the idea of Vince McMahon meeting with Marc Mero to talk about potential gimmicks and having him sign his contract, and then Sable walking in the room "Oh, God damn it, pal, that's who I want to talk to." His just entire attention shifting to her versus him. I just can't imagine how awkward, and it's probably happened exactly like we imagine it.
Especially at that time. Yeah, I'm sure it did. Yeah, absolutely.
Yes. So if 10% of those stories about Vince in this era are true, then it makes me just happy and cringe all at the same. So, all right, here's the deal. We're going to watch the Marc Mero WrestleMania debut, and then we're going to shift to the match on Raw. Both are available on YouTube. Both are available on the network. And if you can't time them up perfectly, definitely go back and watch them. But they're both pretty cool to watch. And Mero, like he was last time, is an awesome guest. So enjoy the interview. We'll catch you on the other side with the aftermath. But right now it's time for the payoff.
Ho! It's time for the payoff.
All right, we are here with Marc Mero, and we're going to be talking about how Marc Mero entered the World Wrestling Federation. Marc, welcome to the payoff.
Tom, great to be here.
All right, so you're making your debut here at WrestleMania 12, and tell us, how'd you think it went? What's going through your mind as you enter the World Wrestling Federation?
Well, this is right after, I became this new character coming from Johnny B. Bad to Wildman Marc Mero. And as you can see, I'm trying to figure out what the hell is a Wildman Marc Mero to know what exactly my persona was. But it was just kind of just wild. And of course, this is where I believe that Triple H comes out. We get a little backstage brawl, you know?
Yep.
But this was not quite the debut I was hoping for. But it was still fun, you know. Triple H was such a sport, man. I remember driving him into that steel door pretty hard too, man. It was like, oh my gosh, we just nailed this door. Yeah, we hit really hard.
And the yellow jacket, are you wearing that because those were the Wildman's colors?
No, I never thought about that, but they did match the gold and black I wore. But yeah, didn't really think of that. But looking at it now, I don't have that jacket anymore.
Good.
That's good.
What made you make the jump from WCW to the WWF?
Tom, you know, it's like going to the WWF was the dance. And it's like the Super Bowl professional wrestling is WrestleMania. And here I am at WrestleMania, man, you know? What better place to make your debut than WrestleMania? So I always knew that my career never felt like it was going to be fulfilled if I didn't go to the dance. And I made it to the dance. I made it to the WrestleMania.
Well, and then the next night, and that's the next clip we're going to watch here, we had you on Raw the night after WrestleMania wrestling Isaac Yankem. Now, is this the first dentist that you had ever wrestled?
The first and only dentist I ever wrestled, okay?
What'd you think of him at the time?
Oh, first of all, he did a great job for me. I mean, obviously, this is Kane. You know, this is like one of the biggest, strongest guys out there. And here he is putting over this new guy that's coming in, knowing he's got to do this job for him. And he did everything we asked him to do, you know, including the moves I did. He was a really talented guy.
Did you look at him and think this guy should be like a star and doing something better than being a fake dentist?
You know, I think not just me, but anyone that wrestled with him knew how talented he was. And it was a matter of just having the right character, the right gimmick. And luckily they found it and it worked. Unbelievable for him.
Was there something about him that, like, does it surprise you that he's a mayor of a city now? Just based on the way you interacted with him? It seemed like a little bit just different.
You know what? He was always really quiet. I mean, he was not loud. He wasn't, rude. He was a good person. And I think he had really good morals and he wanted to help other people. And no, I'm not surprised about that at all.
How did your WWF career come to an end?
Oh, gosh. Like I said, I had 3 years left on a guaranteed contract. And my ex-wife, Sable, had some real issues with some of the guys there. And she filed a lawsuit against the WWF, sexual harassment lawsuit. So we basically just walked away. And didn't end on the way, you would hope it would have. But like I said, you look back on life, I never would have found the things I'm doing now if it didn't end that way or didn't end at that time. So, as sad as that part was, it's funny when you say that because I tend to, whenever I think about me as a wrestler, I always think of these good times and these good things that happen and not so much about the injuries or the negative stuff.
But when you left, you were still feeling good physically.
Tom, repeat that again.
I said, no, it's fine. Yeah, I said when you left, though, you were still feeling good physically at that point and would continue to wrestle, correct?
I could have easily, yes, continue to wrestle. And I was thinking about going, and I think I went over to TNA for a little while. I was thinking about going back to WCW for a while, but it just kind of lost its luster. My love for the sport wasn't as prevalent as it was when I was, when I first started. I'd been on the road for a long time at this point, and it was time to move on to something else.
So you would use this shooting star press as a finisher. Where did you come up with that, and when did you start using that?
Well, The weird thing is that's another thing. I used to be, we used to have this place in Syracuse, New York. We used to go to called Green Lakes. Dude, we just have fun with the craziest stuff, the double flips, back flips. And of course the shooting star press is just a full gainer, really. It's just kind of a full gainer that you lay out. So I already knew how to do it. I just never did it on a rope, on ropes. So I went to my daughter's gymnastics school and I got a pommel horse and a crash pad. And I just started practicing it where I'd lay it out and open up on it. So I'd land on my stomach, And it was at that point that I decided to bring out there. And the first person I ever did it on was Dustin Rhodes, Goldust. And it was at SummerSlam. Never did it before, never practiced it. And I told Dustin before the match, I said, hey, I got a new move I want to try. And he goes, well, what is it? And I said, I'm going to Samoan drop you in the corner. I'm going to the top rope, and I'm doing this flip. But I'll open up and I'll land on my hands and my knees, and I'm chest to chest. He looked at me like I was absolutely crazy. But he's such a good sport. He goes, all right, if you want to go for it, I'll do it. But I never did it before. I remember at SummerSlam, I'm thinking about what I'm doing here. I'm going to the top rope, and now it's time for me to do this move I've never done before, other than in a gymnastic place where you land on a crash pad. I never landed on a person before. And I got up on the top rope, and of course, we nailed it pretty good, and it felt good. But the thing about that move is that when you do it, now I got to do it in house shows and stuff like that, So I'm doing it night after night, but it's, smashing your knees so hard on the mat every time you land, your hands and your knees. So, my wrists started hurting, my knees were killing me. And then it's like, why did I ever come up with that move to do that I do every single night, Now, I didn't have a finishing move here. I beat Isaac Yankem with a sunset flip, I think it was,
Well, yeah, that's what I was going to ask you. You for months you were winning matches doing like moves like that. Was there a reason you didn't have like a strong finishing move?
No, we just didn't have one. We were trying to come up with something, so we were just trying some different things. And I do a slingshot into the ring from outside and pin the guy that way, or do a Frankensteiner off the top rope and pin him that way. But it just wasn't right. It didn't feel right. So I knew I had to come up with something, and I wanted to come up with something nobody's ever done in WWF before. And that was it. That's where I come up with the shooting star press. I was the first one to ever have done that, as far as I know. Maybe years before, but I don't remember. I actually saw a guy over in Japan do it, and that's when I first thought, "Wow, I want to do this move."
Yeah. So, all right, we got one more match. This was 2 weeks later on Raw. Another quick one here, and we'll wrap up talking about your career and really just how you got to the WWF, because it's really an interesting story. Any memories of this entrance music they gave you at the time as you're coming to the ring here? It just didn't really. I'm just curious how that came about, and it was just kind of bland.
That actually, my music became Sable's music. The cat growl.
Yeah.
That was my music. Obviously for Wildman Marc Mero, but then when we split, they kept it with her. And so she had that music, and how crazy it was that music went gold and then went platinum. So all those WWF kids bought that music,
If you were given advice to let's just say one of the high school students you're speaking to, would you tell them to get into the wrestling business now, or would you discourage them from doing it?
Tom, I always tell people to go after their dreams and goals. Who am I to say that's not another Rock out there or another Stone Cold Steve Austin? When people say, the business sucks or this or that, they're gonna, it's all how we, perception is reality, and it's how you perceive something in life. But I really try to get people to go after dreams and goals. But, is it really something they want to do, or is it just because they saw someone else do it and they said that looks cool, but they don't really have their heart into it? And there's a big difference. You got to really have your heart into this business if you're really going to make it big.
What do you wish you would have known when you started getting into the business?
I was not very political. When I mean political, I mean backstage politics. I wasn't one of those guys that went out, hanging out with the bookers or, trying to fit in And I think the guys that were able to navigate their political affiliates, I should say, it helped their career a lot. It's a career that you're raised and lowered by someone's, your profile is raised and lowered by someone's opinion.
Well, it's interesting. People talk about the politics in the wrestling business. It's a company. It's no different than any other Fortune 500 company out there, right? I mean, that's you got to game the system and work politics.
It is, but there's also a buddy system. Like
Sure.
in many big companies, there's a buddy system, and buddy systems sometimes override all that.
So Al Snow's in the ring, Marty Jannetty's in the outside of the ring. Did you know either of those guys well? Any impressions or thoughts on either of those guys?
Got along good with both those guys. Never had a problem. Al Snow, obviously, I work with him a lot more. And, he's got his own wrestling school. He's a very talented guy. And, he found a little niche when it was kind of funny, that back in the Attitude Era, you probably wouldn't see that much now today. No. But, it was, like I said, just a crazy time, and Al was a good guy. He is a good guy,
How do you want to be remembered by wrestling fans?
Gosh, I guess, I really tried my best, in my matches. I never called it in. I always, whenever it was time to wrestle, I came out there and really tried my best. I didn't always have the best matches or the best persona, but I hope people realize I really did try. Looking back, I really cared about fans. Like, I really treat fans good. There's not many people that could say I was a jerk to them or wouldn't sign something or ignored them or called them a name or was rude. I really tried to be kind to people. And now I realize more now than ever how important that is.
What's something that fans may not know about you that would surprise them?
That would surprise them. What would surprise them? Wow. That's a good question. What would surprise them? I don't know. I do a lot of, I have this crazy work ethic. I don't sleep a lot. I only sleep a few hours a day. Crazy work ethic, travel a lot, love people, love God, love people. 2 greatest commandments. I think those are the most important things in my life.
How are you staying healthy when you're out there doing, hundreds of talks a year?
I really try to eat good. It's funny. I travel with a friend of mine. He's the manager on the road that runs my program when we're at schools and stuff. We always try to look for healthy places to eat. We both try to find good, restaurants or, healthy food, so it can be done. It's not easy, but it can be done. We don't go to fast foods like, McDonald's or things like that. We don't do that. We always make sure we get something fairly good to eat.
If you had to go back obviously we're a couple weeks into your WWF career. And 2020 hindsight, but if you had to go back, what gimmick or persona would have been best for you? If you had to do it again and go back to the drawing board, what do you think, what character would have gotten you the most over?
Wow, Tom, that's a tough question because, like I said, when I became the WWF, the creative team had this character, Wildman Marc Mero, and I was using my real name too, which is kind of unusual, using your real name. And I wouldn't have used my real name because it led to a lot of problems down the road, especially when people would know where you are or where you live and things like that. But I'm not sure what character would have best suited me for the WWF. It's a great question, and I'd have to really think about that. So if we do another one, maybe I'll have an answer for you.
Yeah. You'll come back. You'll be like, all right, I would have been the killer, and I would have done. You got it all worked out. What's funny, I think now it's like if you went back in the ring now, I think you'd obviously be a really good guy because of the work you're doing, but you could just as easily turn heel and flip it upside down.
Well, I think that's the coolest thing about, when you flip at the right time. Like when I turned on Sable, I mean, they loved her. She was like, and I remember the things we would do. We'd have her come out in a potato sack. She'd come out dressed as Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer during Christmas. I'd put her in terrible clothes and make her wear these old, moo dresses. Remember? And it was She always staged me. She always had something that would get me over or get her over. And we had so much fun doing that. I mean, I remember we would sit with Vince Russo and come up with these crazy ideas of how she could outshine you on something, So it was all part of the plan. People go, how could you let your wife power bomb you and ruin your career? But people got to remember something, that we were married and the Brinks truck is backing up to our home at that time. So it was like, I never thought about, well, I'm ruining my career because, we're doing this together, and I was so proud of her and her accomplishments.
Well, and I was 14 years old for that potato sack angle, so I'll never forget that one. Well, hey, Mark, we really appreciate you joining us on the Payoff. This was a really great conversation. We covered a lot of fantastic stuff. Appreciate you walking us through your career and being such an awesome guest. Thank you so much.
Tom, you're wonderful, man. Great to meet you, and thank you. And God bless you, man, and the fans out there.
Ho! It's time for the aftermath.
Welcome back, as always. Got to thank Marc Mero for joining us. I know fans really liked him the first time we had him here, and of course, talking about a great match. And this one, just kind of a fun angle, just kind of, not even angle, just a fun story, and just kind of what it led to. So I'll say, like, just a fun note that I read just in one of the write-ups. I'll jump the gun a little bit here because I think it's fun. Mankind and Marc Mero deserve to be spotlighted, but no doubt McMahon will once again fail to take advantage of top flight talent. When the WWF fails to improve, there is one thing that will be certain: old billionaire Ted will get the last laugh after all. I thought it just interesting because even back then, just some of the things. Raw. And so it's interesting how Mankind did get the push. We know the story of people turning their TVs from Raw or Nitro. And just interesting, though, I think how that kind of played out and what it led to. I'll have more on just his push later, but I'll say just before we get, what would you say, who is the bigger star here, Tom, over time? Was it Sable or Mero?
I believe it was Sable.
I would agree. Yeah. So.
Oh, I thought you were being sarcastic. Yeah, it was definitely Sable, dude. There's no question by any metric.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Tom, whatever thoughts do you have on the Payoff?
Dude, Mero's a great guy, but the gimmick sucked, and it's this, dude. I mean, over the years, there have been some iconic characters, right? There's the Hogans, the Warriors, the Savages, the Austins, the Rocks, the Shawn Michaels. I mean, right? And the list goes on and on of all these Undertaker, great characters. But there's just been so many shitty ones. And Marc Mero had talent. Was he The Rock? No. But he could cut a promo. He had the look. He could do just about anything you needed him to do in the ring. It's just the character sucked. And so the process was, hey, you're going to be the Wildman, pal. It wasn't like, what do you want to do? What are you passionate about? What are your hobbies? What do you do outside the wrestling ring? Like, can we extract something out of that, we could go with? I mean, even the Marvelous Mark thing, him being the boxer. I mean, he was a junior, Golden Gloves boxer. So at least there was something rooted in reality. I thought that was a lot more realistic and could have gone more places than the Wildman, right? I mean, like, what do you want me to be, like Tarzan, dude? Like, what you mean? Come to the ring and like a vine or something? It was just so stupid. So, I just thought it was goofy. It never really had a shot. It's tough to take a guy like this seriously. I mean, what's the wild man? You know, it's like I can hear Vince being like, he's the wild man, pal. He's wild. Like, and even on commentary, I think there was some of that, if I remember from watching some of this stuff, of like, this man's wild. Like, just so.
Oh, yeah. I'm going to talk about that. Yeah, that was
okay. Yeah, I thought so.
You heard it right.
All right. So just so stupid, man. So stupid. So I think he did the best he could given it. I thought the promo at WrestleMania 12 was actually pretty good. But again, what are you supposed to do with it? I mean, there's just not a whole hell of a lot you can do. So tell us about the aftermath. What happened with him, during this era?
Yeah, so I stopped the bill just as the Isaac Yankem match was starting. So, of course, they make the point of saying that Sable is ringside, and it's more than likely, and this, of course, is the next night, it's because of Mero. Hunter Hearst Helmsley, he does come to ringside. So, rewind a sec. So, Mero is having his match with Isaac Yankem. Triple H.
DDS.
Yeah, sorry, Isaac Yankem DDS. I apologize. I want to give credit where credit's due.
Well, I just think it's important to include his professional designation.
If we're using the names, yeah, absolutely. So Hunter Hearst Helmsley, though, kind of not from, like, they didn't really show, but it looked like he came, like, kind of from backstage and made his way to where Sable was. When I say Sable was ringside, she was actually sitting in the seats in, like, the front row, as you see. Like, she's in kind of the debuting NXT position where you see on, like, the takeovers where there's someone sitting in the front row. That's kind of where she was sitting. So Hunter Hearst Helmsley, he comes to ringside. He's talking to Sable. Mero, the match actually wasn't bad. Like, he was actually moving pretty good. He was
a really good worker.
I was actually super impressed with how this kind of played out. And it was actually, it wasn't the cleanest roll up, but it was pretty solid from, like, it was a second or top rope kind of roll up where he went over Isaac and kind of got it. And so, and of course, after he gets the 1, 2, 3, Sable, she's cheering for him. She's excited, as we would all be, good stuff. And then he kind of Hunter Hearst Helmsley not happy with that. And so he's kind of getting into it with Sable. Mero sees this, kind of comes over. They push each other real quick. Hunter Hearst tries to grab Sable, actually, but then she slaps him, of course. And then Mero, he grabs her, he pulls her over the barricade, and the two of them leave up the ramp or the walkway together. So that was, now the two of them are then intertwined. Now, after that, about weeks later, he was a comer to the ring during all of his matches at this point, and we did get the official nickname of the Wild Man, and we'll talk about that a little bit more late, in a bit here. But yeah, it definitely was a thing. They kept saying it. That he was, it actually led to Mero defeating Helmsley. It was a pay-per-view. It was In Your House 8. It was actually a 16-minute match. I did go back and watch it. It was not a bad match. Again, good worker, kind of doing that different stuff. It was great. And so Mero actually had some, like we had said a little bit earlier, like some of the big names, man, like we were spoiled, like some of these names. It's, he feuded with Stone Cold, with Goldust. He eventually won the Intercontinental title. He actually, it was dropped it to Hunter Hearst Helmsley. And that storyline, as we've talked about before, it led to our previous episode with him where we were discussing the debut of the young kid, as we all know him, Rocky Maivia, in their Survivor Series bout. So how that's kind of intertwined, how that all comes together. So that's good stuff. So Sable remained Mero's manager. It was actually until he was injured in 1997. It was really until about 1998 when he came back. But during that time, that is when Sable became Sable. So really big, she was getting the big storyline, and what it eventually led to is she got over on her own. But then in the next storyline, when Mero returned, he was then Marvelous Marc Mero, no longer the Wild Man, that he would become jealous. I remember this storyline pretty vividly. He would refuse to let Sable get any of the spotlight. He mistreated her. He would try and make sure she was, that he was trying to be the top billing in these things. And so they had a big feud. The two of them was was Luna Vachon, artist formerly known as Goldust, which is actually a match the following WrestleMania in 1990, WrestleMania 14. So 2 WrestleManias after that were the 2 of them. And then Sable actually ended with the crowd kind of chanting Sable's name, and she got the pin for the win. And so intergender wrestling at its best, back in the day, but we forget about that. Of course, the big storyline that we all remember, Sable eventually challenging Mark after he actually cost her a win after this. Of course, kicked him in the grapefruits, delivered the Sable bomb to get revenge. Just one of those super memorable moments that the iconic, like her kind of getting him up for the bomb. And so really good stuff. And of course it was some of this was, again, it doesn't age well. And of course,
you couldn't have done. I mean, as you were saying that, a lot of that you couldn't have done now. I mean, there's just no way.
And this was, you had the evening gown matches, you had the bikini contests, you had the, of course, the iconic, like, I say bikini contest, but as we all know, the hands on.
Yeah, that whenever I heard you say the iconic moment and the crowd going crazy, I thought you were going to talk about the bikini contest.
I'm getting into it right now. I know, okay. Of course. So we can't forget about that. We have to talk about that. Where, yes, and that was the whole. She was disqualified after the fact because that was not a true bikini, and so of course, right. I mean, I get it. Hey, if you're playing by the rules, that makes sense. It wasn't, and so I get it. I'm not going to fight that, but is of course the adolescent boy, so many of us remember that. So yeah, that was just one of those great things that doesn't age well now, but at the time, like, boy, that's when you're getting 14 million viewers a week or whatever it was watching Raw. So just crazy numbers. So fun stuff though here. It was interesting just kind of going back and watching a lot of this. Tom, what other thoughts did you have, Tom?
Which of Sable's Playboy was your favorite?
I probably, because she was the first to debut, right? Like she was the first WWEF.
I want to say she might have been on twice before anyone else. What I forgot about was, and I think Sable was like at least twice, but maybe 3 or 4 times. What I forgot about was, I remember China, but like Tori Wilson.
Yeah,
weren't there a few others like that did it later on? Like it just became like, it wasn't a big deal. At first it was, but then after they all started doing it, it just didn't really matter. I forgot about some of the other ones.
Well, and people, it was Sable and Tori Wilson were together. You also, Candice Michelle was in there too, and Ashley. And no, I don't remember those off the top of my head. I'm looking at a list real quick for everyone. So
Jeff, I can see them on your bookshelf in your home office.
That is, I know.
Right over your left shoulder.
I actually, keep them handy. Yeah, terrible. But yes, that was some of the ones that were in there.
And wait, let me, over your right shoulder, is that the Shawn Michaels Playgirl?
Yeah, I don't discriminate. So it's in 1999, Sable posed for Playboy 2 times, once in April and once in September.
Well, and those apparently sold like a ton of copies. Like that's why they kept putting them all on there. And then I think, if I'm not mistaken, like it was, I don't know what it was, 25 cents or a nickel or there was some royalty for everything they sold above what they typically sold. So if they typically sold 200,000, then everything above that they would get bonused on. And it really added up.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I think they originally wanted Sunny to do it, and she was still really young, and she declined.
Yeah. Which rearview mirror on that, but yeah.
Well, it was, it wasn't classy, so she decided not to do it.
Right, of course.
So I got some other Marc Mero fun facts for you. So, did you know that Marc Mero wrestled in TNA?
I did. Just kind of reading through the notes, I saw he was there, but I didn't really look into who he wrestled or anything like that.
I was curious what his last match was, and according to our friends at cagematch.net, it's as Johnny B. Bad. He wrestled in May of 2006. I'm sorry, in March of 2006 at a World Wrestling Legends match. This was in Orlando, Florida, at the Hard Rock Cafe, and he was in a tag match wrestling as Johnny B. Bad. The last televised match, it looks like it was from 2004, which was an Impact show, and he was in there in a 6-man. AJ Styles was on his team. So really random. Now, of course, because as all of us wrestling fans do, we get on these like internet deep dives or YouTube deep dives where we end up in some random places. I ended up looking at like the last pay-per-view that he was on. Get this. This is Victory Road 2004 for TNA. Okay. Let me tell you the talent that was on this card. You had Bobby Roode, Road Dogg, R-Truth. Let's see here. DDP defeating Raven. In the semi-main event, you ready for this? Randy Savage wrestled. Barely did anything, but it was AJ Styles, Jeff Hardy, and Randy Savage against Jeff Jarrett, Kevin Nash, and Scott Hall. I'm telling you, man, some of the stuff that happened in TNA, and I've said it before on the show, is so random. Like, I really at some point would love that to end up on the WWE network just so I could like find some of this shit, because there is some random stuff that happened. Now, as far as PWI and Pro Wrestling Illustrated goes, PWI 500 this year, 96, where he debuted, he was 43 on the list. So, you know, I mean, making some waves, pretty well regarded. The potential was there. Again, just got saddled with a little bit of injury and some poor booking, but really was brought in at that IC level and had the potential to be a star. In 1995, he was actually the most improved wrestler by the Wrestling Observer newsletter. So, you know, again, just some interesting stuff there. Rookie of the Year for PWI in 1991. And I won't blame him for it, because I think the work ethic was there and I think the desire was there, but just an underachiever in terms of what could have been. And I just think right gimmick, you know, healthy, right storylines, the guy could have been a really big star. Now, from what I've gathered, and this could be wrong, but I believe it's probably true. What do you think the highest rated Meltzer match is of Marc Mero's career?
Of his career? Oh boy, I have no idea what that could be.
King of the Ring against Steve Austin when he became King of the Ring.
That would make sense. Yeah, that would make sense.
So not long after this. And hint, that might be an episode that we have on a future show.
Maybe one day.
Maybe one day.
I would have no idea.
So let's get into how this was received in the sheets, and then we'll give our payoff score of the Marc Mero and Sable debut, and we'll hit the road.
Yeah, some different interesting write-ups here. Just kind of one random one I kind of found here that I enjoyed. The reviewer gave it a D+, but it said, not much to the debut here, but the key thing that stuck out with me was Vince's commentary. This is for you, Tom. I couldn't count how many times he said, the Wildman, Marc Mero, so that it's stuck in your head. That's the entire point of something like this, and Vince knows how to make you care about someone like Mero, who isn't the most interesting guy in the world to begin with. Just a debut, but it did its job. And so to your point, Tom, yeah, it was exactly as many times as you thought it was. So, and then
the Wild Man, he's wild. King, look at this guy. He's wild.
And then I thought kind of telling here, it was actually the Pro Wrestling Torch. Keller actually did an interview with him from this was right after this kind of occurred. And so I thought this was interesting, especially looking back and kind of what was said. But it said, Keller asked him, at 35 years old, how many more years do you want to wrestle? And he said, I want to wrestle for 5 more years. I feel that's how long my body will still look good. I don't drink or do drugs. I keep my body in shape. I work out every day. I feel I've got 5 good years left to stay looking good. I don't want to go out there looking flabby or old. I think the reason my body has held up good so far is I started so late. I didn't start until I was 30. It's kind of a late start, but not really. Most of their guys really don't get into their primes until they are 35 or 38. So the next 3 years are going to tell the story of what Marc Mero can do in this sport. I think... Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, here's what's interesting about professional wrestling, right? And look, I know it's like acting, it's fake, blah, blah, blah. But if you started naming great wrestlers and I said, hey, when did they hit their stride, or when were they a star? Dude, it's all over the map. And again, I know it's predetermined, blah, 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 but it's there's guys where you're like, dude, 23, that guy was incredible. There's other guys where it's like, yeah, their best work was at 38 or 40, or I mean, hell, guys in their 40s. So it's pretty interesting that like some guys, hit their stride early and peak out. Some guys, it's, later on. There's, some guys, I mean, the one guy I think of that, I mean, has been on top since day one, was always on top, and is going to end up having a run from his 20s through his 40s is Brock Lesnar. But, I mean, it's just interesting how, guys do hit their stride at different times, and some it takes forever and some it doesn't.
Well, and some too, I feel like he says like 35, 38 is when people really start kind of hitting their stride. But we forget, like, some of them anymore, like they're in their mid 20s, if that. And so it's some of the top people here, because I was curious. Like Liv Morgan is 24, like wow. Tony Storm 23, like Rhea Ripley, who's killing it right now, is 22. Velveteen Dream, like, just came. Like him saying that, and he was kind of right. Like his best years were about within that next 5-year gap of when he was kind of like doing this and really putting a name out there. But he did go, and he was out there for still another about 10 years. So credit where credit's due to him as well too. I found this interesting too, because I know, Tom, you had just kind of some side conversations with him, but he said, what were your career? And after your career, you said you might want to go into counseling. He said, yeah, either the ministry, some type of Christian work. I want to continue what I'm doing, talking at schools and churches and working with kids. That is what he does. Like he is very, very good at that too.
Well, and I may have said it on the last time we had him on here, but if you knew the amount of speaking gigs he does a year and his travel schedule to make that happen, it is a freaking grind. And I mean, he is busting his ass, and he's really good at it too. It's really good content, and he works really hard at it.
Yeah. So, and then lastly, the Observer newsletter. I thought this was interesting too, and something that we forget too is this time of the year, like this point in the wrestling world and just the world at large. Like there wasn't as much of this like kind of behind the scenes stuff, and so it's referenced here a little bit in regards to Sable and Mero's relationship. And so I thought this was fun. So they were doing an interview introducing Wildman, Marc Mero, who did a heel interview until Helmsley came out and the two started arguing and fighting. Helmsley then blamed the fight on the woman who they called Sable that accompanied him to the ring. People have told me they are 99% sure Sable is Mero's wife, and it's obvious she's going to wind up managing him. Based on everything that went down before, I have to believe that's the case. Lots of WCW folks found it humorous that WWF knocks WCW for not being original, and then they take Johnny B. Bad and put him in a total copy of the angle he was already in. And so I thought it was funny how 99% confirm that they were together, which just funny because at the time, yeah, they were, but you wouldn't necessarily know that because people were living the life far more back then than they were now. So, Tom, any other thoughts on some of these write-ups, or what do you got?
Nothing else. Let's give our payoff score.
Who will go first? You want me to go
first? I want you to go first.
So I will say, I thought and I'm taking just the whole debut as a package here, but the few notes I had here was one, I thought like the Warrior entrance itself and his return. I know, people have personal feelings about the Warrior. It's good that he at least kind of made his amends, before he died, which is good, like stuff like that. I will always enjoy the Warrior entrance, though. I was a fan of him growing up, and so I get that. I thought his no sell of the pedigree was fantastic. Like Triple H hit it, and then boom, he was right back up. There was nothing. I thought that was really good. Of course, I have like Wildman in all caps and an exclamation point in my notes because I have that there. I will say I'm gonna score this one low. Because this is one of the damsel in distress angle, which not surprising how that kind of played out. But I've always heard the old saying, and I'm sure I'm not the only, or like if it's in a TV show or something, of like the singer outpacing the song. I feel like this is one of those where Sable outpaced Mero. And so like she just became such a star in this. I'm going to give like the two, like if you take it on the matches alone, I would give it like a 2 because that was just the matches weren't great, and they were just setting everything up. I'm going to give it like a 5, just because while we know the trajectory that it went in and what we got from it, I think even looking at this is just like the pocket moment that it was. While it set up the future, it wasn't great to me on its own, just kind of like where it stands. So, and who would have known? Nobody at the time or anything like that, like just how much of a star they were about to have in Sable.
Interesting. Yeah, there's a lot of ways. I mean, that's the thing with the payoff scores, that we look at the broader picture of things. My payoff score on this is a 2.5.
Oof.
And here's why. I mean, obviously there's nothing memorable about it. Look who the players were. Okay. Triple H. Yeah, pretty talented guy. Sable. Arguably was almost as hot as Steve Austin at one point. I mean, huge, got over huge with the crowd. Marc Mero, guy with a lot of talent. So you mix them in and you say, okay, you've got something here to work with. This Marc Mero Sable combination. How should we debut them? What should we call them? What should the gimmick or characters be? How should we, make him a star from day one? I mean, you sit there and you look at this, and it's garbage what they came up with. The gimmick sucked. The angle wasn't great. You had very talented people. I've seen them do far more with far less. Okay. So it needed to be packaged differently. It needed to be presented differently. It's just frustrating, right? So a 2.5, it's not the talent's fault at all. It was just terribly booked and disappointing. So that's where I am on this. It's nothing against the performers. It's strictly just awful booking, and so much more could have been done with this, and it's disappointing. And it was, I was just saying, it was a rough stretch for our guy Triple H, because the pedigree gets no sold, which apparently he was pissed off about behind the scenes. Okay, and then he's supposed to win the King of the Ring, and what happened? Oh, curtain call. So he gets put into hog pen matches with Phineas Godwin or maybe it was Henry Godwin, but it was just
don't put down those matches.
Oh yeah, well it was quite a change there. So, at any rate, that's it. Really good stuff.
Yeah, good stuff. If you don't have anything else, I'll just plug. Of course, like we said, Marc Mero he really has a second career now with what he's out there doing. And so he's on Twitter and Instagram. It's just at Marc Mero. So make sure to not only check out his social media, but then also his website as well, too, with him just kind of doing some of his speaking gigs. He talks to kids. He's kind of out there kind of doing a lot of motivational stuff, putting his name out there to make sure that people know who he is, and really just representing himself super well. So great guy all around. So of course, as we start the show, subscribe to The Payoff wherever you listen. Give us those 5 stars on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening, good reviews, and then spread the word about the show. You can always find us, of course, on social media. It's at Payoff Pod, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. Tom, I'm not going to try and replicate the roar as you did in the beginning here, but I'll let you send us home, hopefully with no more animal sounds.
Dude, I'm not going to try to replicate it again. It was terrible.
Thank you.
All right. As always, thank you for joining us on The Payoff.